Welcome to Tuesday Connect, where truth meets life. This is season 6, episode 5. Would you believe it? We've already done 4 episodes, and I think it's going really well. This is one of those apologetic kind podcasts, and we're very glad that you've been listening, and we hope that you are learning something, but are also just being provoked to think and, just have ideas about the things we're talking about. And on set today are 2 amazing people, and I'd like them to introduce themselves. So let me start with the gentleman in the house.
Ladies first.
Wait, go for it.
Glad to be here. This is my 2nd episode in this season. My name is Baraka. I serve as a children's pastor here at Mamlaka Hill Chapel. Glad to lend my voice to these conversations.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for lending your voice. We'll return it after. And to the lovely lady in the studio.
I'm Leah Omwende. If you don't know me, well, I've been around Mamlaka for a very long time. This is home to me, and I'm very glad that I was asked to join for this conversation.
Wende, there's a lot more that you can tell us. One, that you're a student of religion.
Of theology, yes,
theology.
Absolutely. The Old Testament, to be exact.
Oof.
That is what I'm really, really passionate about.
So when you become a pastor, we can clearly call you a German Shepherd.
Yeah, probably.
Right?
That would be great.
Awesome stuff. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on set. This is a very interesting conversation, and I thank you guys for coming to this particular episode of this podcast. We are talking about this question that, by the way, I realized that I didn't introduce myself. My name is Ted Wahome, and I'm one of the pastors here at Mamlaka Hill Chapel. And we are recording this episodes and this, all these podcasts in our Mamlaka Hill Chapel studio, which we're very excited about here at City Campus. Yeah. So anyway, we are discussing this pertinent question of there's a growing thing about Christianity being a white man's religion. Yeah. And that's a question we want to ask ourselves. First and foremost, do you think that this is an issue, and why do you think that this is actually increasingly an issue that many people are thinking of Christianity as a white man's religion? Baraka, we could start with you.
I see how probably the influence of colonialism and how there's a new rise in a sense of social justice or a keen interest in the influences of what you call white supremacy and other kind of fears that come with that have begun to there have been casualties of this.
Yeah.
And one of the casualties have been Christianity, not just here in Africa, I think just all over the world generally. And that tends to become more prominent in people who are trying to look at or try to interrogate their African identity and to try and see which part of me is Christian, which part of me is African, which part of me is not. For example, maybe is my name John? Does that make me Christian, or can I change? So it's many things working together. And I think this may have been handled in the previous episode on African traditional, religions and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so you could see how that some awakening of social justice could have triggered some of these conversations.
Yeah. Okay. Leah Schmidtke?
Ted, you're one of the few people who's able to say my family name in the right and proper way. So
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes. What I would say is that the West has had a very big influence in the past on the way Christianity is perceived, like through art and media, but also just through the sheer amount of work that they put out in theology.
Yeah.
And I do think it has shaped a lot, and I think some people are revolting against that, being like, okay, it's all coming from somewhere else. Is any of that really, really ours? And I think it's a good question to ask.
Yeah. And sorry to even maybe bring this up, but one of the caricatures of Jesus, for instance, that we have is a very white Caucasian male, right, with blue eyes and blonde hair and stuff like that. And there's even now people who are saying maybe there's a black Jesus. Or maybe Jesus was black, maybe the association with him having gone to Africa or something like that. Could that be one of the other factors that have contributed to this sort of, in a sense, awakening for, this is not our religion?
I absolutely believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's just like it's taking our ways of like presenting people, or maybe even our ideals of what people should look like, and putting that on Jesus, even though we know, okay, that's not really what Jesus probably looked like. I mean, how many people had
Blame it
blue
on
eyes?
the movies. Blame it on the movies.
Right? You
have to
know,
be a Mexican, blue, blonde, and looking a certain way.
yeah. And so what I want us to do is maybe interrogate some of these things that have contributed to this view, right? Maybe we could start with, Baraka, you talked about a close link between imperialism or colonialism and the missions enterprise or with Christianity. You want to maybe delve a little bit into that?
Well, Christianity precedes, at least the impact or presence of Christianity in Africa precedes colonialism. But not too many people actually know that, because many of us know just the mission schools that came up and the things that came up with around the colonial time. Obviously, because the African history isn't passed across in written form. It's just stories that we know. And so many people don't see beyond the influences of colonialism in Africa. And because of the pain, real actual pain that was inflicted on Africans because of colonialism. Yeah. And a sense in which at that time there were also laws and other things that came that enabled, that created an environment that created segregation. A lot of people, that pain, which is real and which should be acknowledged, that pain sometimes can cloud that they begin to see now, because the pain was inflicted by the colonialists who are white people who attacked them and attacked our country and stripped us of. There are a lot of dark, difficult things that happened around the time. So because of that evidence, and I think we see this even in people who've struggled with the issues of racism in the West and other places. Yeah. So such things sometimes have the potential to, because of the pain that has been experienced, creates the difficulty with which people are now able to consume Christianity. Yeah. But if we were honest, an honest evaluation of history would actually prove that there was presence of Christianity before these things that we're talking about when you say that Christianity came purely and only through imperialism and colonialism in Africa. Yeah.
Awesome. It's interesting. You've reminded me of a book I read in seminary called "The Bible and the Flag" by Brian Stanley. And his thesis, if you could summarize it, is basically that in as much as we closely associate imperialism with the missionary enterprise, it's not just that. As people will say that they told us to pray, and when we opened our eyes, the land was gone, or something like that. They came with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other. It's not as closely related as we think, right? That really what happened is that the colonialists, or the missionaries, used the structures that had already been set. But as you rightly said, Christianity dates before that. There was evidence of this Catholic missionary called Francis Xavier, who was a missionary in India and Japan. He passed by, and spent kidogo time, I think in 1542 thereabout, in Mombasa. There were Augustinian friars, in the 1500s and 1600s as well. There are couple of people who actually, there was already evidence of Christianity way before, and we'll get to this. There were some historical developments, especially with some two Germans, all right, from the Church Missionary Society. And I think it's a good thing that we actually have a German in the house, a German shepherd.
I will never get rid of that.
You will never get rid of that
again.
Oh yeah, that's about to stick. That's sticking around
clearly.
For a while.
Thank you,
that's
guys.
Not going. Right? Men like and Mwenda, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the missions? There are two men especially that we know, right, that brought the gospel. That is Johann Ludwig Krapf. Oh, I can't say that.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
just
I
can't
had
say
a discussion yesterday, like, how is it pronounced?
That's
like,
not going to
let me-
happen. And then there was Redman, right? Redman, I think.
Johann.
Right? Johann Redman, right?
Johann used to be a common name at that time, I think. Both
clearly.
of them
No,
are
no,
called
he was
that.
called Johann Rebman.
Yes. Those are two people who, in about, I think, 1844, thereabout, and 1846, brought the gospel and set up a mission down at in the coast at a place called Rabai and stuff. And you were telling me earlier about a little story about when the first time you heard about craft.
Yeah, it was so interesting because I think you guys have really held that story alive, and passed it on, that Johann Ludwig Krapf was the one who brought the gospel to Kenya, because the first time that I heard about him was by Kenyans. In 2012, that was my first year that I was with the Kenya Music Project, and we were touring in Germany. And so we were in the region where Johann Ludwig Krapf came from. And there was a school that was named after him. And as we were passing it, the Kenyans got excited. And we Germans are like, okay, what's with those Kenyans, are they all right? But then they told us, it's like, yeah, this guy is the one who came and brought the gospel to Kenya. And it was really exciting to see that is something that you have kept alive, that story. And I think I read up more about him, and it was so interesting how he was really intentional in getting to know the different languages and starting to translate and really making sure that people would have access to the words of the Bible. I was really impressed. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, he did amazing work, by the way.
And many of these people, it came at a costly price to them at that time. And part of they become casualties, I think, of a political or an economic shift that came with colonialism that perhaps they were not even privy to. Not to absorb. We cannot fully 100% say that not all. Some of the missionaries were perhaps beneficiaries of colonialism in a way, because some of the laws would protect them to some extent from some of the law that would prohibit them, for example, white people to intermarry with Africans at that time, and many others that will segregate the whites from the blacks. And so because of that, they may have, how God sometimes works in spite of, they may find that even in the middle of, they may get entangled in the whole mess when we are revisiting history. Yeah.
All right. So, and I think that's good, interacting with the link between imperialism and the missionary enterprise, right? Let's talk about the whitewashed Jesus, and what's that about, and what do you think? What can you say about that?
So I think my thoughts are several. First, I think it's absolutely true that the way Jesus is depicted, or the way the whole of Christianity is depicted, seems very Western. But to some extent, I will say, because when I looked at some of the art that had been created by those artists, that were doing paintings of Jesus and the disciples, and they're super pale, and you're we all know where they grew up. They definitely did not look like that. But to some extent, that just shows that they were able to contextualize those stories well for themselves. And I think that's
how they perceived what Jesus might have looked like in that particular setting.
Yeah, and also to make Jesus and those stories their own stories, and help them contextualize them and make them come close to home.
I see, yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. The issue comes in when that is everything that is now transported to every part in the world where Christianity now is. Because in the end, that's the call to every single culture to contextualize Christianity, to take Jesus, the stories he has, and to make sure that whatever they say are applied to this current age and time we live in the culture that we live in. And that will have to look very different from the things we do in the West.
So it could be maybe in Africa, as we're trying to sort of even paint or something like that, do paintings, maybe some people would actually, again, contextualize in a way that Africans would find that, in a sense, accessible, so to speak. And that might look different from a painting that was done.
It should look different. It should look different. It should look very different. Yeah.
Okay.
But, like I said earlier, also the fact that the way Africans pass down history is through verbal or oral, because we do not have a lot of written literature that will perhaps. Africans have a rich contribution to the conversation on theology, but that it's not written. You'd find that perhaps most books that are quoted that are coming from the West, then now it may look as if this is something that
it's borrowing.
Probably all fully borrowed from the West. Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about this in our previous episode, and we said that it's interesting that Africa actually has quite a bit of a contribution to even early Christianity.
So much, yes.
I read somewhere that there are 744 references to Africa in the Bible. Would you believe that? When you think about places like Kush, Egypt, Ethiopia, so
Libya.
to speak, Libya. So many places are mentioned in the Bible. They're not just mentioned, but they're prophecies. I mean, our very own Lord took refuge in Africa, in his very formative years and stuff like that. And we see some of those elements again, even as he's reconstituting the church, or rather constituting the church, so to speak, in Acts chapter 2. We'd like to move to maybe another segment of this conversation and ask ourselves, so how do we think about this issue biblically? What are some of the handles that we can use to sort of wade through this conversation so that we don't just leave someone who's actually probably very struggling a lot on this? How can we move forward?
Obviously, by affirming what the Bible talks and says about God. When you look at him beginning and choosing Abraham and setting him apart and saying, through you, the nations of the earth will be blessed. God's vision for the salvation of all nations includes all nations, includes people from far and wide, so that the faith and the people that he's creating, he's not only limited to a certain ethnic, proclivities or certain pedigree or certain way. He has the whole world in his mind, and that includes people of all colors and all nations and all tribes and all cultures.
And I think the Bible gives us the call to create culture, so it's not meant to put us all in one pot and we need to look the same. I think that's in the beginning God wanted the people to go out and build their own nations, their own cultures. And even in the end, in Revelation, we do see that there are people from every nation, tribe, and tongue that come. So I think that's a big point to counter this notion that it's a white man's religion. If it seems like that, then I think we definitely have to look at it, because it's not meant to be a white man's religion. It's meant to be a religion for everyone. And so if people get that notion, then maybe there is something wrong in how things have been done or how things have been perceived. And we should definitely work at it. But in the end, Christianity is for everyone.
Yeah. Awesome. Another part that I'm thinking, or maybe another angle of this conversation, is even as we're just thinking about the fact that Christianity did come around about the time, 1840s, and then 1899 is when we have the British Imperial East Africa Company, I think, and the subsequent British rule and stuff like that. One of the things that I've observed is that in Christianity, there's God. Let me put it this way: God determines the context in which Christianity comes in. Because even in the Old Testament, you talked about Abraham, right? Abraham was a moon worshipper. He was an idolater, so to speak. And he's in the ancient Near East, which had its own ways of doing things, ways of thinking and stuff like that. And God determined that that's when he would choose Abraham to become later the nation of Israel, which would later, now be a blessing to all nations. But another thing that we notice very interestingly is that God seems to work in the context of conquest. Abraham and his descendants, the Israelites, right, are in Egypt and they are slaves. And it is in that particular setting that God comes to rescue them. And then the Exodus becomes sort of like a paradigm for the whole Christian faith, so to speak, right? When we find the Jews, again, also even in the New Testament, they are under Roman rule. So it is interesting that God chooses to work within those contexts. I was thinking about this, and I think we were talking about this earlier, how the Tukutendereza revival. There was a revival that happened in East Africa. It began in Rwanda, spread to Uganda, and came down to Kenya. Also happened during the colonial period. When people were under subjugation. So I don't know, but I see a theme, so to speak, here where God seems to sort of be actually want to bring in Christianity, so to speak, or form a people for himself, even in the midst of conquest and colonialism and stuff like that. So it's not an accident, that God chose this.
It is not, and he both works he works even in spite of. But also there are, in the midst of the like you see, let's look at the nation of Israel. They are going into a land where they are the minority, they're the weakest, and they seem to be the powerhouse that is against them seems to be stronger, as if there's a humility that comes with their dependence on God all along.
Yeah.
And I wonder if all through this, even in the weakness of the colonialism and the weakness in which the message was passed across, I wonder if there is something there when you talk about history and elements of history in which perhaps the Christians were the minority, or they were the weakest, and other things, such that even in our context, when we are looking at history and we're seeing those uncomfortable things that happen in there, but we're able to still appreciate that, wow, that the gospel of message of the cross has still been preserved even to us till today, in the weakness of the vessel that came, that brought it, and it's still here and still thriving.
I think that's such an important point.
Mwende,
you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think, because all of that still doesn't justify what has happened. And oftentimes, even missionaries did things in bad ways, I guess. Like, I won't deny they had good intentions, but I do think some people definitely came and they were not able to really engage the culture well, but came with their way of doing things and assumed that is how everyone, even in a completely different country with a different language and different culture, should do things. But it doesn't deny the fact that God can and will still work through that. But I think a challenge is us to make sure that we try to do a better job at it. It will still be challenging, and we will make our own mistakes as we go about it, because we are just trying. But I think it's a great call to try and do this job well.
And thank you for bringing that up, because we don't want to say, or we don't want to suggest that we sort of endorse any atrocities that were committed, or any evil things that were perpetrated in the context of this missionary enterprise. We don't want for sure to negate any of that, but to say that there is what is actually Christian, and then there's the essential Christianity, and then there's the way that people live it out, which sometimes is mixed with our own weaknesses, with our own infirmities, so to speak. I think it's Mahatma Gandhi who said that I would believe in Christ if it were not for Christians, and I think he got it wrong, because the setting of our faith, or rather the foundation of our faith, is not Christians.
It's Christ.
Right? It's Christ, because Christians will let you down, so to speak. We're about to wind up this conversation. Any parting shots, Baraka?
I'll just repeat what I said earlier, that God is pleased to work through the broken vessels or the broken signposts to point to himself, and that honest look at how God has worked it throughout history, we see how his commitment to the harmony or the salvation of all nations has still not been derailed, has not been distracted, and that should be our joy, that one day all nations shall be gathered before him, people from every tongue, every nation, every language, before the Lion and the Lamb, and that in the in-between we can long and look forward to that day.
Amen. Yeah. Wonderful. Mwende, some parting shots?
Yeah. We've looked a lot at the historical part of this question, but I do want to kind of bring it back to our time and age, because as someone coming from the West, I would say in the West right now, Christianity is declining, if not even dying. So while it's true that in the past the West has had an immense influence in how Christianity is perceived around the world, I think that is declining. And I hope that even, the theology books that are published and everything, that it will be mixed up and there will be more people from all over the world being able to bring their voices to the table. But from that perspective, I would absolutely say right now, really, is it still a white man's religion? We still have some influence, but it's not white men who are believing or women, it's really people from all over the world.
Wow. I think there's a book that Philip Jenkins, is it? No, sorry. I forgot exactly what the second name, but he pretty much said that there's an increase of, or rather the larger number of Christians right now is in the global south, right? And so there seems to be a growth here. And so I think what I get from you is there's also maybe a bit of a challenge to us as Africans in terms of theology. Maybe we need to be writing more, maybe we need to be contributing more to the conversation, and maybe we need to be acting a lot more, first of all, to even send back. They're talking about, there's a lot of talk about reverse missions.
Yeah. And I mean, Mamlaka has been part of that.
Yes. I think we've been privileged to be part of missions in Germany, the very place that sent us two very foundational missionaries who sort of established the Christian faith here in Kenya. And so thank you guys. I think this has been a helpful conversation. We would love to hear your comments and to hear what you're thinking about this very question. So if you have any comments, if you have any questions, please feel free to comment on this, comment on our socials, and help us to spread the word as well. We'd like as many people to hear these conversations, and so please forward this to your friends, to your family, to your neighbors, to all, because we'd love to keep this conversation going. But for now, this is us, Ted, Baraka, and Mwende Schmidtke, and we are happy that you were able to join us for this conversation. So until next week, God bless you.